My name's Owen Griffiths. I'm a fine artist and currently based between Swansea and Oxford. But the last couple of years have been really important to be based in Swansea and to establish networks and grassroots organisations. I've been teaching part-time at Swansea Met on the foundation course after a residency I did in the fine art department. My practice is based around lots of different aspects really, but I think the main thing that reoccurs is the need to engage with a community or to work with a group of people in some form. I suppose that the phrase that we use for this kind of work sometimes is relational aesthetics. So this work sort of fits into those contexts. That's where my practice is based at the moment. And what's nice about that, what I like about that, is that it can work in film, or it could be drawing, live event, participation. All these things are possible within that one title. Since about 2005, I've been collaborating with two main people, Adele Vi and Fern Thomas, but more recently me and Fern have been working together quite a lot on a few projects. And since our residency we did in Aberystwyth Art Centre last year, it allowed us a time to really talk about work and talk about ideas, and that sort of brought lots of things out really. It was a very good time, very organic time to start thinking about projects. And we've been working with drawings, we've been working with film, lots of different forms, but me and Fern worked together on a project recently called For the Bees. For the Bees originated with a question really. I mean, me and Fern were very aware of the problems that the bees were facing, and we would see headlines in newspapers and issues on the news that come up about colony collapse disorder and lots of different things that are affecting the honeybee. And as our practice is kind of, the common theme is the environment or socially engaged practice, it was quite a sort of automatic response really to think about how we could work with this question of what's happening to the bees. The project started from engaging with the bees and thinking about how we could make a difference or make a project which really addressed the problem, but maybe created an image or a question that the public could reconnect with. So instead of thinking that the bees are a really separate part of our lives, how to sort of somehow link that closer, or to bring members of the public into close contact with bees. And we had the idea of working with a musician called Mile Watkins, who's also based in Swansea, to compose a piece of choral music. We heard about a story of someone in the States who recorded the sound of a healthy hive of bees and played the sound of the healthy hive to an unhealthy hive, and she recorded a difference in their well-being. So we thought this is a really interesting idea, and it's coming from maybe a environmental or biological background, but it's quite interesting to maybe appropriate that sort of form or that gesture and see how we as fine artists with a socially engaged practice could work with that. You know, a lot of people came to see the bees and were following our updates on the blog and things like that, and it generated a lot of press. So I think it was a hot topic, as it were. You know, it was something that people were generally concerned about. We started off as two artists knowing absolutely nothing about bees, but having this sort of environmental concern. So we thought we'd better enrol on a beekeeping course. When we proposed the idea to SAVLE and the Arts Council, we got backing to do the project. So we received quite good level of funding for the project, and we made connections with different organisations across Swansea, the Swansea University Entomological Department, Swansea Parks in the local authority, the Taliesin Art Centre, who sort of facilitated the event and promoted it. And sometimes it's quite difficult to explain to people who aren't connected to art or not artists to how you're going to sing to bees and how that might make a difference, because sometimes the reaction was negative, or sometimes the reaction was questioning whether that would make a difference. But we decided to stick to that idea of raising that question and trying to work with it. So all those connections and links allowed us then a load of expertise, which was great. So it became an event in the International Year of Biodiversity calendar. So all these things helped us promote the project, which became a really big piece of work, became much bigger than we actually thought it was going to be at the start. So it was really interesting to meet within that world of science, biology and entomology, to meet people who are in different fractions. You know, there are a lot of people who are connected to beekeeping who have a holistic or organic agenda, whereas there are a lot of other people who see it as a business. So it was quite interesting to somehow we were sort of straddling those two areas, where we were interested in the the big business side of the bees. I mean, how they're shipped across the states to pollinate different crops from Florida to North America, and a smaller scale organic approach, and what the difference between those two things are. So when we explained that we were quite open to discussion and we were interested in the idea of a collaboration, I think people were very engaged with the project, and that worked really well in our favour. The practical information and the facts about the bees were really, really interesting, like the dances that happen, how they communicate with each other, the community, the system of the hive. All these things we found really inspiring and really easy to make visual work from. So a lot of the work we started, the beginning of the project, was sort of visual documentation of us learning and doing sort of photographed actions with honey, or we did one piece where we ate a teaspoon of honey for 120 days, which became a photographic print. So these images were kind of ways in for people to the project, or little sort of comments on how we were learning about the project. We started working with beekeepers across Swansea, meeting different beekeepers, recording beehives with sound, with microphones with our musician. We built up the levels of the recording. We listened to the different levels of the bees and composed a piece of music, which actually turned out to be based on some of the recordings and an old gospel song. So the idea of creating something quite soulful and quite slow-paced in response to this kind of urgency or kind of serious environmental problem. The piece of music that we composed with Mile, the idea that we had was that we'd get a choir to sing this piece of music to the bees. And this was based on a historical fact that we found out about people who bees were usually kept outside of the village, and people would go and tell the bees their troubles or their worries. So the beekeeper would get to know everyone's news and gossip and who's died, but would also get to witness people telling things to the hive of bees. And it seemed like it was a really interesting, really poetic image to work with. The events themselves at Taliesin with the entomological department and all the different people that came to see us, they were sort of performances. So what would happen is that the bees were established. We put 2 hives of bees in the university grounds, and the public would come to a series of performances we were doing. But also there was a gold caravan with a film of the project happening in it. So we'd made a mobile cinema that could travel with the performance, so that people could engage with the documentation as well. Fern and I were shortlisted for BBC Young Scientist of the Year, a project called So You Want to Be a Scientist, about amateur scientists really, or people who've got an interest in a scientific event or action, and how to do that in the context of not being a scientist really. The hives are now situated at the community farm, so now there's lots of school kids going to visit the hives and they're learning about bees as well. So the legacy's taken that other step as well, which is really important. I think the main effect of the project, we've questioned the scientific element, we've questioned the creative element. I think the main effect was to get people engaged with the bees and to get a group of people standing around a beehive listening to another group of people singing an abstract piece of music to it. I think there's a real poetic reverence in that action, and I think it's been a seminal piece of work for us in our careers, and it's really going to help us shape our practice in the future. And the press that it attracted and all those things have been really positive. But the main image that me and Fern return to is the idea of people collecting, people gathering around a hive and listening to people sing to them. I think we always stick with that image, we always return to that.